Welcome to another edition of the Football Victoria podcast. My name is Michael Zappone. Greg Blake is with me again.
How are you? You're looking wonderful today. You've been doing things with your blood today, haven't you? Been giving
donating blood. Yeah, that's important.
You're a good man. You are a good man.
Community service.
You're a good man.
And another good man sits next to me and you, Greg. Lou Sticca joins us as our special guest today. Lou, thanks for joining us.
Thank you, Zappa.
He was once voted the most influential man in Australian football, yep. Greg Blake, and that probably still rings true today.
For good reason. I'll tell you, Lou, you're a bit like the will o' the wisp. You know, they seek him here, they seek him there. It's been a long. I haven't seen you for 23 years, and you still look wonderful. Look, the reason we thought we'd have a chat to you today, because a lot of this podcast, what radio station? A lot of this podcast stuff is we just want to talk about, because trace the tracks of the game. Now you're a big hitter in so many ways, but I want to go back to, if I may, am I allowed to do this now?
Of course you can. Yeah, this is your idea, great idea.
Is this really my idea?
It was, yeah.
I don't remember what I had for breakfast this morning. Hello everybody. There's a camera in there, by the way, Lou, so just be very careful. I recall, and I'm going back 95, 96, 97. And I recall two things about you. And number one was, for some odd reason, I was at your home, and I think you were trying to broker a deal with me because I was fabulous and you wanted to, I don't know what it was. But even at that time, when the internet wasn't a thing, it wasn't really a substantial thing, you were already working on a sports website, and you were showing me what you were doing, and I had no idea. And I thought, this. You
still have no idea what it is.
I've got no clue. I got schooled on Twitter. Is that the one? Mm. It's good because I don't know what it is. But I thought at the time, this bloke's way ahead of the game. And then, of course, you were the central figure in the Carlton Football Club in the old NSL. And it's always that story in particular, that narrative about that time in the game and the place that Carlton had in the game. I still find a really, really interesting part of our journey to where we are today. You are a groundbreaker, and you are a big hitter, and you were ahead of the times.
Thank you, Blakey. Look, like I keep on saying to people, I'm just a football fan. I just love what I do. I've grown up loving the game as much as I still love my other sports, AFL. In fact, I was telling someone the story a couple of days ago. I was asked the question, how did you exhibit your love for the game? And it was really simple. On a Saturday, I'd go and watch the Carlton Footy Club at Princess Park at 2:00, which was the traditional kick-off times. In fact, I'd go there much earlier with a very good friend of mine who played for Australia at under-23 level and was a bit of a hero at Brunswick Juventus, a guy called Fabian in Cantalupo.
And he was a good player.
Very good player.
He was a gent.
Great left footer.
Yep.
And we'd go and watch the footy on a Saturday, and then on Sunday I'd go to Olympic Park to watch my beloved Brunswick Juventus. So the two sports for me have always sat hand in hand.
But you're a great fan, which is fair enough. But how many fans at home? Michael, I don't know about you. I've never just got out of bed in the morning. I think I'll form myself a club. What do you reckon? It's not. At which point did you just, because the game was changing. It was heading towards that really significant ethnic cleansing period, if you will, where the names were going, clubs were getting dropped. At which point did you all of a sudden go, bang, I'm going to get a club up?
I'll tell you very, very clearly. So I was the worst player ever to put on a pair of football boots at Brunswick Juniors at Sumner Park, famous Sumner Park. So I learnt very early on in the piece. I accepted very early on in the piece that I was never going to make it as a footballer. So, but I had a real love for the club and a love of the people. I used to love hanging around a lot of the older guys on the committee and ex-players and just being around football people. So there was one particular guy that sort of a mentor, and that was Rocco D'Zio. You know, Rocco very often.
Oh, Lord, I do, yeah.
Still doing very well. He was awarded the Australia medal. I used to hang around with Rocco quite a bit at board level, and then I actually progressed right through and ended up being vice president of Brunswick Juventus in the early 90s. And it was sitting at these committee meetings week after week that I started to see the frustration of what was holding the game back. And at the same time, on Saturdays I'd go and watch my Carlton Football Club, And I started off as a member behind the goal and then worked my way into the social club and then gradually became a Carlton coterie member. And it was quite expensive to be a member at that time. But the great privilege was that little badge allowed me to get into the change rooms before, during and after the games. And being in these change rooms, and at that time you may recall Carlton was a very successful VFL/AFL club. And looking at the faces in the change rooms, it was very clear that there were a lot of people of Italian, Greek, Jewish extraction, Lebanese, Maltese, people that you could just see by looking at them would have been born into soccer but had moved over to AFL because that was the way of the world. You're in business, your bank manager invites you or your client invites you to the footy, you go and then you end up taking a table. You bring your own guests.
Was there a snap moment, though?
That was a snap moment.
There was a snap moment.
That was it.
Who was the first person you spoke to about this and why?
Well, okay, so in 1993, I decided to resign from Brunswick Juventus and said, no, that's it. This is not the way the game's going to progress. I then wrote to John Elliott at the Carlton Football Club. I sent a letter, and in the letter it was something like the things that I've just articulated. Famous club, big support, a lot of ethnic fans. I think football would have a hold, our football, soccer would have a hold within your club if we could set this thing up. And so 4 weeks went past and I get a letter in the mail, Carlton Football Club, John Elliott.
Just to younger viewers, explain what mail is.
That's right.
It's a bit like
an envelope with
wasn't
a stamp.
it?
So I get this envelope, Carlton Football Club, all excited, open it up, read it, and basically said, great idea, Lou. Can you come in and see our CEO, Ian Collins? So
that's a big fish straight away.
It was. So 3 years,
And you
4
hadn't
years.
met John Elliott or Ian Collins at this stage? It was just a letter?
It was just a letter.
Yeah.
I referenced the fact that I was a Carlton coterie member. I suppose they got me a little bit of, inside the door type of thing.
That is a fabulously bold move, but the result, the outcome is extraordinary as well.
Yeah, look, it was amazing. So it took us 3 to 4 years of planning, and we finally decided to come in 1997. It was the tail end of football as we knew it at that point in time. There was the chairman of the FFA was a guy called David Hill. David had very clear ideas on how he wanted the game to go.
He did, didn't he?
I hate using the word, but wanted to de-ethnicize.
Well, that's literally what it was.
Yeah, de-ethnicize, or let's say change the makeup of the club from being a monocultural organisation to a multicultural. And in doing so, created a lot of angst amongst the traditional clubs. I could see what he wanted to do and where he was headed. Perhaps his mode of operation wasn't going to bring out the best in people. At the same time...
he polarised people.
He polarised people. At the same time, the television deal had moved across to Channel 7, who famously warehoused it. And basically, fans couldn't follow the game.
Well, it went to their pay TV arm, to be fair. But,
Which Greg was a part of, right?
Yeah, that's why I got really hurt when he said it. I'll just quickly, if I may, Zappers, because you were around, you were a young bloke at this time, but I don't know about you, but I recall the stirring of emotions for me anyway when this whole Carlton thing came about. I was excited about it. I just thought the whole concept was brilliant. Do you recall that?
I do indeed, yeah, and I went along to watch Carlton. I follow another AFL team, but not having grown up watching the NSL, Brunswick Juventus was probably a bit young, a bit too early in my formative years. I was too young to go out on my own, so Carlton was a team I started following in the NSL because we just didn't have a club that we latched onto in the early days, and especially in that first season, there were great crowds at Optus Oval.
It was a lot of fun putting the whole thing together.
Who was also a big part of the vision and actually getting it out on the park? And again, there's a lot of people dismissive about the NSL. A lot of people dismissive even about that period where you had Carlton and then the next year Collingwood, etc. But if you're around at the time, there really was a stirring of enthusiasm.
And just tell us a little bit about how it works. So you went to see John Elliott and Ian Collins, and they said, okay, go and do it. Did they give you the autonomy to go and set it up? Did you work with them really closely during that 3-year period?
Absolutely. So basically, I was asked to put a budget together as we got closer towards the time that we thought we were going to start, which is around the 97 season. So I think it was just after Christmas, 96, 97. We started putting things together, put a budget together, went and saw the Carlton Football Club Finance Committee, which comprised John Elliott, Sam Smorgan from the Smorgan family, James Sutherland, who was the CFO at the Carlton Football Club, who went on to become the CEO of Cricket Australia, Stephen Goff, who was the CEO of the Carlton Football Club.
Moly.
He replaced Ian Collins and is now the secretary at the MCG. So some pretty powerful people.
So you had to be bang on, didn't you?
Had to be bang on, yeah.
It's like Broadwaying your show on Broadway, you know. I mean, debuting your show on Broadway. That is, were you terrified at the time, or did you think, I got this nailed?
I could say I wasn't now, but I probably was. I would have been trembling under the table. But I scratched together a P&L and submitted it, and they said, no, not good enough. See you in a couple of weeks. So I went away. So I think on my third attempt, I walked in and they said, okay, this one's approved. We'll see you in 12 months' time. Make sure it works. And to their credit, and we did have monthly finance meetings, but to their credit, they said, there's your budget. Go out and do what you've got to do. We formed a board of directors, which comprised Jack Riley, the famous Jack Riley, icon of Australian soccer. He became the chairman. John Valmorbida, very famous business family, and Robert Shannon from Shannon's Insurance, and another gentleman called Athol Hodgetts, who was the direct representative of the Carlton Football Club. So we basically were the board, but I was left to pretty much run the show on my own.
Yeah,
we had a really lean group of executives, but we had the access to the Carlton Football Club Finance Committee, the membership, the stadium. So they built a training, a change rooms for us. We had access to training on the main ground, the grounds outside. We were treated, in all honesty, with absolute respect and professionalism.
We're talking to Lou Sticca, the good, well-dressed bloke next to me here, and so you would have been early to mid-30s then, and by yourself, you're 59, I know what you're...
I was 37 then. So
that's mid, that'll do. But to achieve that in a posse of all these names that you're talking about, really significant heavy hitters in terms of the Melbourne Sporting. So to do that at that point was a remarkable achievement. Do you, in retrospect, with perspective now, do you realise what you did? That amazing stuff.
Look, it was amazing. It was fantastic times. I mean, if I could go back today, there's probably a couple of things I would have changed. I think
that's what I'm interested in, yeah.
Calling it Carlton was probably the wrong thing to do, because by doing that, we've alienated 11/12ths of the city. So people like Zappo, I had a lot of friends of mine that supported me because they were supporting me. But as rusted on Collingwood or St Kilda or Richmond or Melbourne, whatever it might be, to come and support a soccer team called Carlton would be difficult. So had we have gone out with Melbourne Blues, I'd say that our crowds would have been significantly more.
Did anybody offer you that sort of feedback at the time?
Yeah.
But you were...
But when you go to John Elliott and say, we're going to start the club, it's the Carlton Soccer Club, it's Carlton. So, and look, the pitch that I put to him was very much building on the Carlton brand. So ultimately, it starts and stops with me. But leaving that aside, we also came in 1 year after the Collingwood Warriors. And anyone that attended that first game that Collingwood played at Victoria Park, there were 15,000 people.
Yep.
They had to open up the gates. They couldn't control it. The second game, it had already dropped down to negligible amount, because what had happened is people thought Collingwood were doing what Carlton was going to do, but actually it wasn't Collingwood. It was Heidelberg Warriors called. Yeah. So it wasn't a true AFL involvement. It was more
And I
like
think that
a
was
rental.
more hastily prepared.
Correct.
I think,
It was. We suffered a little bit from that, but we went about recruiting, building a very, very competitive outfit. We were, in all honesty, the first true professional football team, soccer team in Australia at the time. We had great sponsors like Nike, Parmalat. It was just incredible what we were able to build. We had one experience that I was mentioning earlier on to Ralph Barber, which I think really you had to live it to actually understand. But 4 games into our inaugural season, we stopped for the infamous Australia versus Iran game at the MCG, and that result, I'm sure, had hurt the game. That failure to qualify and the way we failed to qualify when it was looking so good hurt a lot of the upside for the game.
Yep.
But we got over that. We pushed on. We made the grand final in year 1.
And just quickly, I want to mention too, you managed to draw, and you weren't doing the player management back then, but you managed to entice some really big names at the time in the NSL to the club. Was that a hard sell?
Players that went on to be part of that golden generation:
Absolutely.
Bresciano, Grella, Kennedy.
Yeah, I follow a particular model, and every time I've been involved in recruiting, I use the same model at Carlton that I then used at Sydney FC in 2005 and at Western United in 2019.
Can you reveal your secrets on that?
Yeah, look, I think it's just getting a really good mix. So going out and getting some experienced players that had played at that level, getting some returning Socceroos, getting some under-23s and under-20 national players, players that had your Danny Allsops, Andy Vlahos's, players that were on verge of going to the next level. You had seasoned campaigners, then a couple of unknowns out of the state league and from other state leagues overseas like Sean Douglas and then Mark Atkinson.
Marcus Sturgeover was one of my favourites.
Yeah.
He looked like a pirate, do you remember?
He did.
He did.
Yeah,
He looked like
so a real character. So look, we had a really good mix of people. Good characters was very, very important. And then we took a couple of little risks. The John Markovskis of the world that had been basically left on the shelf by others. We took a risk on him, and in year 1
was good.
It was very good in year 1. And then obviously the ones that give us a real buzz, the ones that Zappa just referred to, being able to identify guys like Vince Grella, Simon Colosimo, Marco Bresciano. Even today, I still get goosebumps, and I still talk to the boys regularly. I was on the phone with Vince Grella about 12, 13 hours ago. I still have a lot to do with Simon Colosimo. Marco I bump into once or twice a year. But those 3 were great, and there were others as well. And then you had some of the great internationals like Kresimir Marisic. I mean, just an incredible footballer, real character. It was just a lot of fun putting it all together.
So again, I mean, if you just tuned into the podcast on channel, whatever it is, we're talking to the man behind Carlton. If you don't understand the relevance of Carlton in the history of the game, well, go and look it up on your Googlepedia because they play. Am I right, Googlepedia?
Google. I've never heard that before, but that's pretty good. Let's use it.
But he's a big hitter in the game. And he was back then, but this was before the A-League and before player management and everything else. This young bloke went out and created a club from nothing. Do you remember, Lou? And I do because I was there for opening day. I remember it was a really weird time because there was a couple of people, the SBS mob, for example, Johnny Warren and
Les.
And Les. You never saw them in Melbourne. They never came for an NSL game in Melbourne. They turned up for Carlton's first home. I just remember all these faces turned up to see Carlton play their first home game at Princes Park.
Well, he was very, very supportive. Johnny Warren helped us in the lead up to the first game. He did a number of functions for us. He was really excited about the arrival of Carlton.
Yep. Do you remember that first game?
Yeah, I do. I remember it vividly for a number of reasons. So my office was in one of the grandstands, so I could watch the boys train. And that particular day, I remember seeing the signage getting put up around the place. And at the same time, a really good mate of mine had a famous racehorse running on that particular day. So I remember, I said to myself, I've got to go to the TAB and put $10 on this horse. Anyway, I missed out. It paid a ridiculous amount of money, and that horse went on to become a really famous racehorse in the Melbourne scene, a horse called Testarossa.
Absolutely, yeah.
And so that day was famous for both reasons. We played Perth Glory, and Perth was owned and run by a really smart businessman in Nick Tanner. And what he'd done with Perth Glory, playing at a decrepit old VF8 type ground, and he dressed it up, and he brought a lot of smarts to Perth, and no doubt, as you know, his place in the sport should be revered for what he did with Perth.
Absolutely,
an amazing job.
Well, first season, 17,000 home average for the
Correct.
entire year.
Correct.
They were just the big new thing.
And that first game, we got 6,000 and that was really deflating. And I think that's one of the areas where, again, if I was being self-critical, focused heavily on the football and getting the football right and getting the sponsor and the fan experience right, but not in marketing aggressively enough to get a much bigger cut through.
So when the players came out of the playing tunnels for that first game, you watched the setup and the horse had won and everything else, and you're watching them come out, were you conscious more of the perhaps disappointing crowd that you're talking about, or more pride in, holy crap, it's come together, I've done this?
A combination of everything. I mean, obviously, I still remember our good friend who's passed in David Savinsky going up and scoring that famous first goal. So his place in history is very well earned and respected. Watching the game up in the grandstands with my colleagues, and obviously very passionate about it, getting into the dressing rooms afterwards and experiencing, but looking around and seeing such a big stadium and only 6,000, I felt that I'd missed an opportunity. And it's really important when you start, you need to start with a bang. And I think that we earned our respect on the park, but I feel like we could have done and should have done better off the park.
So let's fast forward. You mentioned getting to the grand final in the first season, and that was against South Melbourne, and that was an extraordinary grand final. I still remember I was calling it for C7, which was the pay arm of Channel 7. But
The Shelf,
it was a great,
according to Lou.
Yeah, it was. I'm really feeling... I'll get over it, but I'm feeling a little hurt now.
Sorry.
No, don't worry about it. Yeah. I was always a big
hater. Did anyone have pay TV then? I don't think we did.
No, they didn't have pay TV or in the internet. But look, I feel validated.
But Blakey got a job. So.
Yeah, don't worry. All right. I'll just look. I'm going to respectfully treat all that rubbish with contempt. Now, but I remember the grand final. It was a great day. You came that close. For me, I thought, because I liked Carlton, I really thought what you did was magnificent. I thought you'd made it. I thought the grand final in the first year, and as you said, you got your respect on the park. I don't think support was terrible. And I thought, yeah, we've got something new here, and it was a great era because then you had Northern Spirit coming in. You mentioned Perth, Parramatta Power again. It was almost as if we were having this, this rebirth of the NSL, which we watched kind of start to dissipate over the years. It was a great time, but it was a sad time because it was almost the start of the end.
Well, very much so. In fact, it was a feeling you could see that we were in trouble. When the league was in almost immediately.
From your first season, yeah.
It was very obvious. You had a chairman of the competition that no one wanted there, and then you had competing forces trying to replace him and then ultimately replacing him, and then they would be scuttling each other. So we had the opposite of unified, call it whatever you like. It wasn't good. I left in 2000 when the Carlton Football Club ended up deciding to sell the club because they had their own internal issues. The AFL wasn't happy with them being involved in soccer. John Elliott had his own wars with the AFL at the time. People within his own club were starting to gather forces against John. So he pulls me aside one day and said, "Look, Lou, I think it's time that we, if you get the opportunity to sell, we should sell the club." So another bidder came in, took it over. I worked with them for a little while. I just didn't see where they were going and where I wanted to go.
Were you sad? Did it hurt?
Oh, very much so.
Yeah.
That was it was a really terrible time. I mean, people might think it's exaggerating, but it was emotionally very draining because it was a club that I'd put my heart and soul into, probably a little bit too much heart and too much soul and not enough brains. You can't get too emotional about everything that happens. You've got to be a little bit more clinical. And at the time, I went full bore. So when I could see that the club was not going to fulfil what the vision was, I thought it was best I leave. And I departed. And lo and behold, 12, 18 months later, the club went into administration. And then a year after that, the A-League was shut down. Went into limbo for 18 months, and then the A-League was born.
Before we get on to the A-League, and I'm wondering, you just mentioned it because there was a crest of a wave, I thought, in the sort of mid to late 90s. And the game was divided, but were there any critical mass points where you just knew that the NSL was going, it's gone, it's done?
Not to harp on the television component, but I will harp on it. It was brutally difficult for people to follow the game.
Okay.
So the TV was a major issue. And then once I'd made the decision to leave, you start looking for negatives, even if you don't want to. You just see things through a different lens. I was still very attached to Carlton and to the game because, coincidentally, being this CEO and arguing with players and staff and everyone else to get it my way, it was a real honour that after I'd left, players started to come to me saying, "Listen, Lou, can you help me with my contract?" I thought, okay, and then 1 became 2, became 3, became 4, and in the end, I thought, well, I'll if I'm going to do this, we'll do it the right way. I went and sat my FIFA player agents exam in 2000, and I started off as...
How'd you go with the exam? You
passed
passed
it,
Get an
passed
elephant stamp and take it home, put it on the fridge.
No, it was, that's another story I'll tell you one day. It was that's a good one. But so I was still involved in the game, but you could see it had real problems.
And just with that, I know we're going... I want to lead with something because I do want to talk about you're involved with Sydney in the A-League, etc., and then now Western Melbourne thing.
United, yeah.
Yeah, I don't know. I'm too old to remember everything, but and I'm gonna put that in your ballpark,
Sure.
Michael, because I think you're more over it. But one thing that interests me about you, Lou, and I say this now that you've completely decimated my morale for the remainder of the day, I'm going to cry it out at home tonight. I need a safe space. But the one thing about you now, I mean this sincerely, I thought, from my experience, the Carlton, what you did to put Carlton together and what you were doing playing internet stuff, and I'm not being facetious at all. I remember being in your show, and I'm going, this guy's, because this was unbelievable. I've always thought rather highly of you, okay? About you, people know you in the game, right? If I say Lou Sticca, they go, oh, or they go, you polarise people, and I wonder why that is.
Yeah, look,
they know you, but it is,
No, I do, because unfortunately, I say what I think. So it is what I am. I mean, at this stage of life, I'm not going to change now. So I am opinionated. I have tried to mellow in the last couple of years in certain respects, but I can't help it. I really love the game. I won't ever get into a discussion about the coaching side of things because I won't embarrass myself, but I see myself as an expert or someone that knows the business of sport and the business of football, and I'm very passionate about the way it should go, and I don't mind telling people so. As I say, if we had Eddie Krinchevich here and Stuart Munro and we were talking about the football on the pitch stuff, I will never talk in that environment because I won't embarrass myself. I think I know what a good player is, but maybe it's a good player From a visual point of view, I enjoy watching him play. But tactically, technically, I'm going to leave that to the experts.
Isn't that funny? You and I both have no idea what we're talking
That's
about.
right, exactly.
And yet we've made a career out of it.
Exactly.
So go us.
Yeah,
you know what I mean?
I just realised what that says on your arm.
Don't go there,
hopefully we
Michael.
can't pick that
of
up.
Course we can't. And you know, merely by the end of you drawing attention to it, don't. Oh, look,
It's
honestly,
taken me 4 episodes. I've just seen it.
That's tremendous, Michael.
Yeah.
Let's make sure everybody focuses on that. Do they go? Can they do like?
Yeah, Ralph can do
come
everything.
on.
He can erase it as well.
All
So
right,
tell
good.
us about that step then, Lou, from the end of Carlton, which was a dark period for you and for many, into the advent of the A-League. You changed your role and your focus. Tell us a little bit about your involvement with Sydney FC, and I suppose the one name comes to mind is Dwight York.
Okay, so basically, go back to the Testarossa scenario.
Yeah.
I met a particular person in that period, a gentleman called Walter Bunyo.
Mm-hmm.
Walter at the time was CEO of Lion Nathan and was responsible for the Melbourne Cup being called the Tui's Melbourne Cup. I don't know if people recall.
Mm-hmm.
And he was a Sydney sider but spent a lot of time in Melbourne. Was very good friends with the owners of this particular racehorse, Testarossa, at one of the big victory parties. I met Walter. We started a friendship, became pretty close.
Fellow Juventus fan?
Yeah, we share one love, and which is the Juventus football club. So I get a call one day. I'll never forget it. I'm driving around Carlton. There you go. Driving around, and I get a phone call from Walter saying, "Listen, Lou, I've got something to ask you. I've just been invited to become the chairman of the new A-League team, Sydney FC. I'd like you to come and put the team together." And I said, "Bang, done. Oh, no negotiation. I'm in. I love it.
Yourself?
No. This is. I thought this is fantastic. And so similar scenario. Their board wanted to know a plan. Put a plan forward, and basically they said, "Okay, well, just build us a team." And went about. I think I recruited pretty much everyone in the football department. One person that was already preordained was going to be the assistant coach, a guy called Ian Crook. Crookie is a real legend of a football person. He's the academy coach at the Western Sydney Wanderers now. He's been head coach of Sydney FC, had a great career at Norwich and Tottenham Hotspurs, came out and played in the NSL with Northern Spirit.
He did.
So got to meet Crookie and started to put the team together, and we'd ring each other at 7 o'clock every morning, this and that and this and that. We've got him, let's look at him. And then Dwight York came into the conversation. And Crookie used to play with Steve Bruce, who was the coach of Birmingham City at the time. Cut a long story short, we said, why don't we go for Dwight? Spoke to Steve Bruce. Steve facilitated. I spoke to Dwight. I don't talk football. You got to talk to my agent. Spoke to his agent, and I'm sort of simplifying it now, obviously, but we managed to sell him the vision. And from the minute that Dwight signed and arrived, it was just an incredible experience to see what he did for the game in this country.
Till this day, still one of the biggest names on and off the field to have the biggest impact on and off the field in the 15 seasons of the A-League. I'm sure you'd agree with that. The next one, if I fast forward a little bit, because we could speak for hours, is I suppose Alessandro Del Piero, who created headlines across all types of media. Tell us, I know you've told this story many times, but I never get sick of hearing it. How did this come about?
Okay, so again, I working in this beautiful sport, I'd always make sure that I was in Italy at some time when Juventus was playing at home, and this particular game, this was the last game of the season, and Juve had to beat Atalanta to win Serie A. And
You were probably there with Walter.
I met Walter afterwards.
Right.
If I tell you who I was there with, you wouldn't believe it.
Yeah.
Peter Filopoulos,
Right.
CEO of FFV.
There you
He
go.
happened to be at a conference, and we crossed paths in some communication, and so we went to the game together. And
Yeah.
I've still got photos of Alessandro and the emotional send-off, blah, blah, blah. But anyway, cut a long story short, I'd got his number from Juventus, who I'd already established a working relationship with, and I remember meeting Alessandro's brother, Stefano, at this famous hotel in the middle of Torino, or Turin, where the Juventus football club would stay on match day. Really, really famous boutique hotel. And so texting each other, okay, I'll meet you downstairs. So he comes downstairs and I go into my spiel about how it'd be great to get him out to Australia and blah, blah, blah. And he was biting his lip, Blakey. He was biting his lip because I think he was going to burst out laughing. But he was just trying to be polite. And in the end, I really, really admire him because I thought he really wanted to tell me you're dreaming. But we finished in a cordial manner, exchanged details. I went and watched the game and happy days, we won. But I kept on emailing Stefano, the pest that I am, dog with a bone, all that sort of stuff. I kept annoying him, and I think 2 or 3 months went past. So I remember the season finished in May. The A-League season starts in October. Around August, July, August, at the same time as I was starting to try and hook him, a good friend of mine had become the CEO at Sydney FC, Tony Pignata, ex-FFE CEO, ex-Wellington Phoenix, taken over the job at a really big club with really strong ownership, Scott Barlow and his father-in-law, David Traktovenko. So Tony, I rang Tony and said,
Is there
Tony,
any danger you can stop dropping names? Luke?
Sorry.
I think we're already impressed. Okay.
Sorry. But just so to put in context, Tony, what do you think? He goes, oh, come on, you're serious. And I said, look, I think we...
Even though he's an AC Milan. Oh, no, he's a Napoli supporter.
Napoli fan, yeah. We, of course we're interested, but is this real? So this time had gone past, and then the hook started to dangle. I get an email. Oh, hi, it's Stefano. Lou, can I have a chat with you? And I thought to myself, wow, I think we might have got a bit of a bite here. And in all honesty, it went super ballistic from that point onwards. In the matter of days, conversations just continued to get elevated. Numbers started to be thrown around, conditions, this, that, what happens if this, what happens with that. I said to Tony, we need to get on a Skype tonight. So Tony flew down from Sydney. His family's from Melbourne, so we went round to his house, get the laptop open, Skype conversation with Stefano and another couple of people involved in Alessandro's management team. We closed the conversation with, okay, you guys get on a plane. We'll meet you in Milan. So we organise flights. We get on a plane. I said to Tony Pignata, now, Tony, if there's a limo driver with a board saying Sticca Pignata, we're in. If we get there and there's no one there to pick us up, well, we've just been dudded. Anyway, lo and behold, we arrive, and the limo driver was there. We went into town, had a series of meetings, a dinner. Then it was agreed that we would meet back at the offices of his management, which again might not mean much to a lot of people, but to people that understand who Gianni Agnelli is and was, one of the owners of the Fiat family, who owns Ferrari and Juventus.
Tick, another name.
And we're actually in his office. So it was just a pretty emotional experience. We finally got to the right number. Tony would be on the phone with his chairman. Chairman, he wants this, can we do this? And we got an agreement. Out of the back door, Alessandro walks in, signed the contract. We gave him his shirt, took that famous photo of him signing, which I then texted to a couple of mates here in the media. I should have copyrighted it because that photo did the rounds of the media around the world. The next day they organised a massive media conference, and it was bizarre, only topped off by the reception he got when he arrived into Sydney Airport, which is just a another level.
That press conference, I was at Fox in Sydney, and the producers called me up and they said, "Oh, we're here. They're doing a press conference. It's going to be live. Get in the studio and translate it for us." So Alessandro's talking in Italian, and I'm in the studio, Blakey, trying to translate live on television.
How'd you go?
What he was saying. I think I did okay. I think I did okay. And the other memory of that, Lou, was I was living in Sydney at the time, and you brought him down to the Sydney Football Stadium to unveil him to the fans. And this is something that we see in Europe all the time, but we don't often do. I don't think it's ever been done in Australia.
There were thousands there.
It was just to see him walk onto the pitch, hold his jersey up, no training. It was just to see him in the flesh. And I was up on stage interviewing him, and you look up and they're literally probably 8,000 people there.
More people than saw Carlton play. Yeah.
I get you. Absolutely.
And listen, I've got to do two observations, actually three, if I may. When Michael starts saying, "Well, we could talk all day," that means whatever this is. Apparently, it's a podcast, whatever that is. We're going to get wound up pretty quickly, so I want to do that. Second thing is, Michael, you and I have to talk about why you're looking at my arms while we're on air. But the third thing is, Luke, as I said, I haven't seen you for 25 years, and you have been name dropping, and it's embarrassing for no. You've led an amazing life, and do you at this point reflect and go, "Geez, it's been a good ride"?
Working in football in this country is very difficult, let me tell you. A couple of good friends of mine who live overseas told me very early on in the piece, you should just pack up and come and live over here. So there's no question, I love what I do. My family have been very supportive. Two of my sons work in the business. We love it. But it's a tough country to run a successful football-centric business like I do, when the industry here is, in all honesty, is very, very small.
Yep.
It's minuscule compared to the other sports it has to survive against, namely AFL and NRL. But I love it, and I wouldn't have it any other way.
And there's no airs and graces about you, and that's funny, isn't it? Because again, I haven't seen you for 20 years, but all these experiences and all the people you've mixed with, and yet you've come in here today and you're the same bloke that you were 20 years ago.
A couple of quick ones to finish up, but they're big issues, so it could take a while.
Good one.
You just spoken about the NSL and what worked and what didn't work. Sydney FC, what worked, it didn't work. If you were an A-League owner today, what would be your number one priority to fix or improve the A-League?
I'd be looking to put into place a 3 or 5 man/woman board of management or a commission that have to be completely independent, not represented by any of the existing 12 A-League clubs, because they've all got vested interests, and it's going to be impossible for them to make a decision for the betterment of the league when they're sitting there looking after their own interests. I don't see that happening though, and that concerns me. We wanted to break away from FFA control and break away from the Lowy control, and as I said to many people at the time, be careful what you wish for. So what we've done is we've moved away from Lowy control, and we now have a situation where are we independent? Are we not independent? The answer is not really. We're not fully independent, because somewhere along the line they've realised that if they completely break away, that gives Fox the out of their contract. So now there's a lot of backpedaling. I'm really disappointed that it's got to this stage, and that's not in any way criticising any of the A-League owners, because every single one of them to a man has put in a load of money. There isn't one A-League owner that has taken a cent of profit. It's a question of not if they lose money, it's a question of how much they actually lose. When you get single proprietors like Tony Sage over in Perth, it's just incredible what he's put in to keep that club not only afloat but doing well on the park. And that goes right across the board. And a lot of these guys get criticised, and perhaps they shouldn't be in the game. Maybe their ownership model is incorrect. Maybe the model that they should be looking to have created is something along the Melbourne Victory line, which is multi-owners. So that way, if one individual has a disagreement, moves on, or has a business that might have a downturn and moves on, it doesn't affect the progress of the club going forward. But every single one of those owners has put in a lot of money. But that doesn't hide the fact that something is not right.
May I ask then, and this is in a word, but you do pride yourself on being candid and forthright. I've had it, and I don't really delve into the A-League game as much as you guys, but it has been put to me on a number of occasions that the A-League, currently as it stands, is, what do we call it, a house of cards, and that at any given time it could just, that's what cards do, they go like that. I'm just doing the noise here. How accurate is that? Right?
No, I don't believe. I think that there are challenges, but if you look at the ownership group, start with the Melbourne Victory, as I just finished saying, they've got a very, very strong ownership model where there are many, many people that own Melbourne Victory, some more than others, and I think if anyone wanted to move on, there'd be others that would fall into line to take their shares. You've got Melbourne City that has the backing of the City Football Group, and people can say whatever they like. The fact is that City Football Group are going to be around for a long time. Sydney FC, a repeat, Scott Barlow and his father-in-law, David Traktovenko, very strong financially, huge business empire that they operate, both in Australia and overseas. Western Sydney Wanderers, a very strong ownership model as well, similar to the Melbourne Victory. So your four big bedrocks of the A-League are sound. They used to say that you're only as strong as your weakest link. One could say that in the chain of the A-League that there are many links that are weak and need to be strengthened. I think that can happen once decisions are made for the betterment of the league. Once the league starts to take control of its TV revenues and other layers of sponsorship, has more of an input into the quality of the TV production that's put out, has an input into other key elements of the game, and has a good, strong working relationship with the controlling body or the national body in the FFA. And for the first time, we've actually now got at the FFA, in James Johnson, an individual that has 15, 20 years of top-end football management, both at the AFC, FIFA, and then the City Football Group. I'm a big fan of James Johnson. I think he is the man that can lead the game to greener pastures. He needs a very strong board behind him, and I think Chris Niku and some of his colleagues are good people, and I just hope that they give James the opportunity to do what he needs to do. And then with a strong FFA and a strong independent A-League commission, and I repeat, independent, you can't have owners of the existing clubs sitting on a commission. It has to be independent. Go out and find 3, 4, 5 people in the 26 million people that reside in this country.
I've got nothing better to do if you want to.
There you go. Why not?
Up for it. Michael's looking at his watch, so
I am.
No,
there are a couple big ones I need to
you've
still.
got more.
Yeah, and this
I'm
is
looking at
question
my
without
watch.
notice, and people will see Lou here sitting and wondering why I haven't asked him about Western United yet. What can you tell us about what's happened there? And obviously, you're no longer officially involved with the club.
I'm still a shareholder in the ownership group. Look, I was brought in to help establish the initial bid process. We delivered the licence. I helped build the team. Once we'd signed Besar Berisha, my time was pretty much done in terms of operationally. There was really not much else for me to do. I think we built a pretty good structure there. So the last thing you need is people hanging around having their 2 bobs worth. At the same time, I've still got the Tribal Sports Group that, as I mentioned earlier on, I've got 2 sons in the business, but, it's still a lot of those contacts that I deal with on a day-to-day basis want to be dealing with myself. So I went back into the Tribal Sports Group, but I'm very bullish about Western United. We've seen a resurgence in the last couple of weeks. I think they are suffering a little bit like what Carlton did, and that is trying to establish an identity in a saturated sports market like Melbourne. I think not having access to a dedicated football stadium close to the city, but on the west of the city, has been a huge impediment. But that was always factored. We knew this was going to happen. So I don't think there are too many surprises in the ownership group of Western United Football Club.
The crucial thing is getting them to that new stadium, right? Getting through this pain period, which we always knew was going to happen. We need to go, but before we do, Football for Fires, another great initiative that, you commenced. It was your brainchild. We saw the impact of the bushfires in Australia this summer. You came up with this wonderful idea to invite footballers from all around the world to show their support to raise money for the bushfire appeal. Tell us a little bit about that before you go.
Okay, so obviously we've announced a raft of players. We've got our national coach, Graham Arnold, taking one of the teams, our former national coach in Gus Hiddink.
That was a good idea, that.
Taking one of the others. Yeah. Look, I mean, the support from within Australia and internationally has been immense. This was really more about the international football community coming to Australia's aid. And that's the way I pitched it to the Drogbas and the Yorks and everyone else. And to a man, they've all embrace that. So we will go ahead with the game, and the question mark then becomes whether it's a closed door event or whether it's open to the fans. We're going to announce we've just signed a free-to-air TV deal with SBS, so the game will be shown on free-to-air across the country. We've also signed a deal with beIN to stream the game globally, with Twitter and with Sportsflix for pay-per-view. So in terms of an international audience, it'll be immense. And the key driver in holding the game is to raise money. So we're going to the broader football community, asking them to donate. So far, we've had Celtic Football Club donate $10,000. We've had the owner of New York Cosmos and Fiorentina donate $5,000. We've had Sydney FC raised $10,000 last week. So the football community in Australia, but specifically overseas, are showing their support. And at the end of the day, whether we raise 100,000 or $1 million or more, we're going to do our best in difficult circumstances. But at the end of the day, other people have got much bigger issues than what we've got, whether we get a crowd or we don't. The game will go ahead, and that's the main thing.
Lou, it's been a wonderful journey. It's a great concept, Football for Fires. We look forward to supporting it, and your story's a wonderful one. I'm sure there are many more chapters to write. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you.
Just a quick one, if I may, too, actually.
I was winding up.
Yeah, I know you were. I'm just doing this to spite you because you keep going.
Well, Lou needs to get to an appointment.
Oh, it didn't matter 5 minutes ago when you had big fat questions to ask, did it, good folks at home? Just two things, Michael. You gave blood today. You've given too much. You look 5-10 kilos lighter. You've got to be careful. Yeah. Lou, that one time I came to your home, something I've never told you before, I stayed the night and watched you sleep. I've never been. It changed my life. Changed my life.
That's
now
a worry.
Do what you like, Zappy.
Thanks for watching, and we hope you enjoy that.